and welcome to the White Noise podcast. This is our very first episode, so please excuse any tangents or audio problems. This is very much a product of the pandemic, and we are recording this over Zoom.
We do have almost like a patient zero kind of version of this podcast, but we used it as more like an experiment to kind of realise why we were doing it in the first place.
Yeah, that'll never see the light of day.
Yeah, no, we never know, maybe in like decades time when we're super famous for doing it. But no, the reason that we wanted to start doing this podcast is because we are two people that just adore film and we love talking about film, and we just wanted a place where we could reach like-minded people who would give us the time of day to listen to us.
And not film boy, frat boy students. We don't want to talk about your typical things. We don't want to talk about Fight Club. We don't want to talk... Basically, if you're a film that's worshipped by, I don't know, you know, that guy that says he's the devil's advocate in your film class, if he would be in that guy's top 4 on Letterboxd, then we're not going to talk about it.
Yeah, I left school and college to avoid that guy. I don't want to welcome him back in.
Exactly. There's enough of them making podcasts, so we thought we'd leave those films behind.
We'll be, despite the name of White Noise, we'll be your quiet, easier side of the podcast world where we don't judge, but we may criticise.
And we're also, I would say, going to put a heavy influence on, let's be real, probably female-led films and LGBTQ films, because both of us are members of those communities. And
they just don't get enough coverage. As much as people obviously talk about in this day and age, there is more, of course there's more, but there is still not enough.
And if we could help shine some exposure on some of those films, then that would be absolutely great. Also, we would like to occasionally criticise bad pieces of media. We don't want to just stick to the ones that we personally love. We want to kind of explore new things that maybe our listeners suggest every so often. We want to explore things we wouldn't typically usually watch and just go from there.
However, if we don't have anything beyond critical to say, so if the only things we can come up are negative things, then we probably won't do a podcast on it, because we don't want this to be somewhere just kind of where we tear down stuff. You know, we want to break down stuff and analyze it, either for its good or bad aspects, but we don't just want to take something and just tear it down completely, because there's no point in doing that. There are enough people out there doing that already. We want it to just be a little different.
The world doesn't need another Cinema Sins, let's be real.
Yeah, exactly.
But as we said, that we are both people that are really into film, and we have been for a while. It's how we met. We've known each other since we were in secondary school, and I'd say the way that we actually became friends was through films. We
should probably actually introduce ourselves.
Yeah, that's true.
Who we are. Just realised people have no idea who we are.
Oh, you can take the lead.
Okay, well, my name is Skye, and that is all you will be getting from me for now. Not that I live a particularly exciting life. I guess the briefest intro into my relationship with film is that I've always loved it. I've always kind of analysing stuff and breaking it down anyway, finding the reasons that people did things. And I suppose that's when I met Lyanna. I'm going to introduce her for herself. She kind of introduced me into ways to do that. Like I'd be watching something and I wouldn't fully understand kind of what I want to say. But then Lyanna kind of introduced me to these films that gave me something to critique or gave me something to praise, and just basically opened my eyes to a whole new world of film. It also helped that we were both in media studies in secondary school together, and Lyanna pretty much every Friday used to just give me a huge collection of DVDs to go home and watch. And I'd watch them all on a weekend, and then I'd hand them back to her and we would talk about it in media. And then
don't forget English literature.
I'm getting but then we both also took media studies in college, which I think is when it really kind of started, if that makes sense. Like, you know what I mean? Like
definitely.
The thing is, we were then taught kind of more about what to look at or what not to look at. And since then, we've just never really been able to sit through a film, especially when we're together, and just watch it as kind of like a passive audience. And there's nothing wrong with watching films like that. Sometimes I wish I still could watch films like that, because I can sometimes ruin things for myself by reading too much into them.
But I don't think you can say necessarily that things are always ruined. I think that sometimes it makes them even better, and that's the great thing about having studied media at school or by yourself.
Definitely. But yeah, so I that's why we both kind of decided that this podcast would be a good thing to do, because we like, I can't say for sure because about being self-boastful, but I think sometimes we have these kind of conversations where a lot of the time we want other people to kind of be able to hear and give their views, whether they agree with us or not, because it just opens that kind of conversation that's just so interesting.
I would also add that I think we're the kind of people where if we go with a group of friends to the cinema, we want to go on and on and on about the film for 2-3 hours afterwards. And it can feel very isolating when nobody else wants to.
Mm-hmm.
And we know
Which,
those
again,
people are out there.
Yeah, we can't force them to. So I don't, like, if people don't want to, then fair enough. But that's why I think you need to find people who do, so you can kind of get it all out, and you don't feel frustration when then you are talking to somebody who isn't interested, because we're not all interested in the same thing.
Exactly. I think that's the great thing about us finding this platform, is that we can find an audience, and it's not like a whole we're not like the other girls kind of thing, because it's very obvious that that audience is out there. I mean, there's whole areas of YouTube devoted to it, like film dissection and commentary. And I think that for a long time, you and me had a combination of thoughts, and those were that either people wouldn't want to hear our thoughts on it, or that those people just didn't really get any attention. But I think in the past few years, that area of the internet has definitely amped up a lot. And also, who cares anymore? If we felt like doing this, who's to say we shouldn't? And it's just fun.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, this could end up getting a big audience, or we could only be the only two people to ever listen to it. But, you know, currently I'm the only person reading my own writing, and I enjoy doing it, so why not?
Oh, 100%. I think that we're not putting this out there with the intention of building a huge audience, and that might be apparent by how unprofessional we might sound to begin with. But if we're going to have these conversations, we thought we might as well put them out there, because they happen a lot. Whenever we meet in person, it ends up turning into conversations about films. It basically, I would say these discussions reach into every corner of our friendship, so it's clearly important.
It's very self-indulgent.
Oh, extremely.
Very much.
Yeah, exactly. And yeah, I just don't think there's any more to say about it, really, than that we have complementary tastes, I'd say, rather than the same. Because
that makes us sound very sophisticated.
I mean, like, so Skye will love something that I'm not so keen on, or vice versa, and I actually think that makes our discussions, and will probably make this podcast, more interesting than people that sat there and talked about how great The Dark Knight is. It is a good film, but still.
It is a good film, but it's just like, you know, everything's been said.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, not that I haven't watched replicas of the same kind of conversations myself, but I just don't feel like I can add anything to those conversations, so I want to start my own.
I think that's something I do want to stress here, is that there's nothing wrong with consuming that content or making that content. It's just simply not the content that we want to put out.
Yeah, and if you don't, you know, people always say if you don't enjoy what you're making, then chances are nobody's going to enjoy consuming it.
Exactly. I think that's everything. And we can dive into films. And like, I would just like to say again that these aren't going to be your, you know, IMDb top 50 films every time we record. We could occasionally touch on those films, but for the most part, we kind of want to talk about films that are maybe a bit smaller and deserve some more attention. And and we also want, I don't know where I'm going with that thought. I think I worded it already.
Well, I think, because, you know, I can read your mind. I think you were going to start talking about Raw, which is the the first film we are looking at in episode 1.
So there's a lot of reasons that we chose Raw. Basically, Skye pointed out to me a really interesting point, and that is that we're both vegetarians, which definitely plays a part in how we view this film. And we could... Exactly. And obviously we're both women, so that's a big part of it as well. And another thing is that we both love horror. So basically this film was made for the two of us.
I was a bit worried about where you were going with that then, about what we like. I was kind of like, okay, all right. Anyway, so basically Raw is a 2016 body horror written and directed by Julia Ducournau. I really hope I did pronounce that correctly. In its simplest terms, the film is a coming-of-age story exploring the pressure of college life, the dysfunctional love of siblings, and the fear surrounding our own bodies, but especially when it comes to sexual awakening. Ducournau uses the character of Justine, who is a vegetarian raised from birth, who ends up being left on her own for the first time at the mercy of college life, and during a hazing ceremony for her veterinary course is forced to consume a rabbit's kidney that is the catalyst for an unquenched craving for raw meat. And if that does not entice you to go and watch this film, I don't know what will.
Bravo.
That is, thank you. That's actually the first thing I will say, which I know people always say when they go into reviews, but if you haven't watched this film for some reason, please do first and form your own opinions without us influencing you in any way, because it can just be read in so many ways.
Yes, I totally agree. There's some films where I will admit I have listened to podcasts about it first, just because I have a sick guilty pleasure of knowing endings before I watch something. But I would say with Raw, you need to go into it like you would have with maybe, say, a film like Parasite. You need to go into it completely blind. It will just make the experience so much better. I don't even want to describe any kind of scenes yet, because I want to get rid of anyone that's going to get spoiled.
Yeah. It's like, don't worry, we will come back for you. Just maybe this isn't the one for you yet.
Yeah, please don't. Maybe in a future episode it'll be a film that can be spoiled and it'll not be a big deal, but definitely with this one, please go and watch it first.
I just think if you go into this knowing what it's about, which as far as I'm aware neither of us did, I know I definitely didn't, it will just, so much will go over your head because you already know what's going to happen and you don't kind of think about why it's happening.
Yeah, definitely.
Sorry. That's a lot of that's going to keep happening.
Yeah, that's true. I was going to say that I found out about the film through Carsten Runquist, who is a film YouTuber. If you're already into like the film community side of YouTube, you've probably heard of him. He's very active on there and Letterboxd and Twitter. And I think that I really appreciate him using his big platform to advertise this small French female-led horror film. And if we can help a few more people watch it as well, then I'd love that.
Well, I'm grateful as well because I learned about it from you, which I do most of the films that I enjoy. So I am thankful that you found it.
You make me feel like a video store clerk.
I know. I mean, I think one of the first things I want to say before we go into the themes and such of this is my first reaction the first time we watched this is I put out a tweet saying this film had made me a double vegetarian because I'm not judging anyone's lifestyle. You can do what you want, but I am very confused how you can watch this film and not even kind of question your eating habits if you do eat meat.
I would like to think that some people would step back if they're, say, omnivore. Is that what's called when you eat both? Omnivore. If you're omnivore, I'd like to think that you would step back and think, "Holy fuck! Like, why am I disgusted about one kind of flesh and not another?" But if Oksha didn't put you off, nothing will. So
it's true. And I think that is one of the biggest themes of this film is the breakdown between animal and human. Ducournau really, I feel like every time I say her name I'm going to end up making it worse, so I'm going to go on a first name term and I'm going to call her Julia.
Oh, are you friends?
I know, she probably hate me. But one of the biggest themes of this was, say, the breakdown between animal and human, and kind of the question of why are we so different? Why do we feel, like Lyanna said, disgusted by somebody eating a human finger but not by somebody eating a raw piece of meat out the fridge? You know, whilst both may disgust you, you can't deny that one sets you on edge more than the other.
So me and Skye had a private discussion before starting recording this, and I actually pointed out that I found the raw chicken scene much more disturbing than any of the cannibalism scenes. That is, though, most likely due to me being vegetarian. So I'm not sure if you feel the same way, maybe, Skye.
I do. I can't lie, I will admit I did still feel, I mean, I'm sure you did as well, I'm not denying that you felt okay while you were watching her eat human flesh. But I did feel very similar feelings towards it. But again, like you said, it could be due to the fact that we are vegetarian. But obviously, as I'm sure if you've seen the film, you will know, or just from hearing us talk about it, cannibalism is a huge, huge thing in this film.
Yeah.
But unlike a lot of films where it's just used for shock value or it's used to depict a monster in society, it's used more as a form of sexual awakening.
Yes.
And whilst that can sound traumatizing, that's the point.
It's the best way to put it is that cannibalism is used as a lens to explore teenage female sexuality. And it's
Mhm.
interesting that Julia Ducournau chose such a taboo topic. And I did mention to Skye there is a very similar film, I think from the 90s, called Ginger Snaps, which does a similar thing, but with being a werewolf, so lycanthropy. That is fantastical, and it's made humorous, it's black comedy, but in Raw, it's very much rooted in our real world. This isn't some kind of spiritual horror. It's not paranormal in any way. This is stuff that could really happen today. And I think that makes it far, far creepier in its darker moments.
It
And
makes it very intimate as well, I think,
yes.
is another word I could definitely use to describe it. Like, again, when we first watched this together, the first time I ever saw it, I was watching it with somebody else. But then I
Mm-hmm.
watched it on my own for the first time last night,
Mm-hmm.
and it was a very different experience watching it.
Do you think you would have enjoyed the experience more if you watched it for the first time alone?
I couldn't say. I feel like it would have unnerved me more because
Mm,
the first time that we watched it together, I was obviously able to decipher that, somebody eating other people or just somebody eating raw meat in general is a very disturbing concept.
yeah.
But when I watched it again, it kind of went beyond that because after Justine consumes the rabbit kidney, she then goes through this metamorphosis kind of change. It was those little things that I didn't really think about before. The body horror and shock value of it, like when she starts to develop the rash and the fact that she then feels this disconnect to her own body because you can't decide when your body's going to come up in a rash or anything like that. It's your body's decision.
Yeah.
So it gives you that kind of, betrayal of your own body, which through puberty and sexual awakening, a lot of women do start to feel. They start to feel like their bodies aren't their own anymore.
Yeah. And I think that's a very, very female fear. Like
Yeah.
men, what, they grow some pubes as teenagers and then their body stays pretty similar for the rest of their lives. With
I'm
women,
not diminishing,
no,
I'm
yeah.
quickly put a
No,
disclaimer, I'm not diminishing that men also go through
no,
some
yeah,
shocks of puberty, but they don't start doing things their body had never particularly done before.
exactly. And I also think that a lot of stuff that happens to women's bodies isn't talked about at all. So
Mm.
when I
At least
watched,
not when we were at school, which I know makes us sound old, but it's true.
no, 100%. I think that this film really captures that feeling of having no idea what's happening to you and feeling isolated. And that in itself is just a whole separate topic from the cannibalism. Obviously, they mesh at
Mm-hmm.
points, but I think that in itself is one of the actually horrifying things about this film.
It's almost like the cannibalism becomes almost like a side thought. In some
Yes.
scenes, it's undeniable that it's there,
Hmm.
but it's not there because it's like, oh, this is the person eating another person. It's like there's a reason that this is happening.
Yes.
You're almost made. Well, no, you are made to feel sympathy for Justine and everything that she's going through. Like, again, it depends on how you watch it. But when I watch it, I never watched it and looked at her and thought, this is some kind of monster. This is someone that I can't connect to in any way, which just isn't true because there are some things that she's going through that you can relate to. Like I said,
Yeah.
the changing of her body, the fact that one of the other biggest themes in this film is sibling relationships and how she looks up to her elder sister,
Hmm.
who is subsequently going through the same thing as she is because they are both from the same family, and it's implied that this birth into cannibalism is genetic. Her sister is still the one that forces her to eat the kidney, knowing what will happen to her.
And that is so twisted when you think about it as
Mm-hmm.
simply as that. You know, the moment where she first catches Justine eating her finger and the single
Yeah.
teardrop drops down her face. The
Mm-hmm.
second time I watched that film, I found that incredibly moving because it was
Yes.
just this sense of sistership. When you know prior to that scene, because you've already watched the film, that she is also a cannibal, it
Mm-hmm.
becomes this moment that instead of being horrifying feels really moving, and it shows like a sense of solidarity and family, and that is what is so weird about this film. It can be
But the thing,
touching
I
and
completely
scary.
agree because that is very much reflected in the scene after they're taken to the hospital and then they run off to go basically find food together. They're almost like they're hunting together in
Yeah,
the sibling bond.
or more
You
that
know,
she's teaching her how to hunt.
yeah, exactly. It's like Alexa doesn't even explain, or Alexia, sorry, doesn't even explain how or what is happening. She just walks in front of this car, the car
Mhm.
crashes, and she starts eating this guy's head. And Justine even tries to stop her because she kind of wants to deny what is happening to her, but she can't, because it is this animal instinct that, again, the whole theme of the film comes back to.
Yeah, I
Of,
agree.
you know, animals don't suppress their instincts, but why do we? Not saying that we shouldn't, but why is it that we do? You know,
No, I
like, I'm
get
not
that.
saying go out there and start eating people,
It's like,
but yeah,
it's this sense of like a pack almost. Like
yeah,
she's protecting her, but then obviously sisterhood is much different to a pack. Like it takes on sinister tones that, you know, she's not an older animal teaching a younger animal how to fend for itself. She's literally encouraging her to be a fucking cannibal. So
yeah.
obviously there's some distinction to be made there, but I do find it very interesting that an older sister, who you usually consider being the person who will protect a younger sibling, is the one encouraging her to go into this dark taboo thing. And the obvious parallels with urges and sex are there. It's,
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, you could read her as protecting her by teaching her how to do this secretively, or you could argue that she's sabotaging her in a way. Like it's a weird bond, and that's why I think sisterhood is really important in this film, because it wouldn't work with just a friend at all.
No,
It has to
it
be
wouldn't,
sisters.
because you feel this obligation to, which I'm not saying you don't to your friends, but you do feel this obligation with your sibling to protect them, even if you can't stand them,
Yes, definitely.
or any member of your family sometimes. You know, like, I think it was also very significant that it was Alexia's finger that Justine first consumed. As,
Oh,
like, I'm pretty sure that's the first time that she eats human flesh, isn't it?
yeah, because that's the scene
Yeah.
of the waxing.
The infinite, infamous, infinite, infamous bikini wax scene.
It's probably the scene that everyone will come away remembering. That and the final scene, which we'll probably talk about in a bit. But
For
the
one of two
wax.
reasons, yeah, because I
Mm.
feel like this scene is a play of two acts, because it's either you're going to be horrified because she's eating a finger, or you're going to be horrified just for the simple fact of a bikini wax.
And no, to add on top of that, her older sister is giving her a bikini wax.
Yeah, it's true.
And it's like, I don't know, because that for made me feel really uncomfortable, but it's like, would I be more comfortable if a stranger was doing it? Like, it just shows their close bond.
It's true.
And
I,
they're shown to have this weird boundary, and I don't know if it's a French thing or if it's just them particular, but like, you know, when they piss in front of each other, and
yeah, do
yeah,
you
I
know what?
don't.
I don't know. Like, I'm not gonna say who, but I had a conversation with somebody the other day where they were just telling me a story. They were out, and I'm sure people listening to this have done the same thing. You're out on the piss, pun intended, and you just don't have a toilet in sight,
Oh
so
god.
you just go in the street, you know. And I always find that really funny
Oh
because
yeah,
I just can't.
I feel like it doesn't matter how drunk I am, I can't piss in
Yeah,
public. I can't do it.
I can't.
And that is, I know it's like a silly topic, but doesn't that say something about urges to begin with? Like, just before
Yeah,
she becomes a freaking cannibal, her and her sister are peeing in front of each other. So that kind
yeah.
of already says something about how free they are around each other.
But also importantly, the way, it just sounds really weird, but the way that they're being is really significant.
Oh
Like,
god, yeah.
we were talking about it like a little bit before we started recording, but I just thought that whole rooftop scene between Justine and Alexia is really clever, because it shows a kind of humorous bond between two sisters,
Yeah.
but it also goes again into another really hard hitting theme of this film, which is breaking down female stereotypes,
Yeah.
like the ridiculous belief that women just don't go to the toilet. It's like, whatever, like, whenever I even do it, because it's just not been shown to me that much through film and TV show, but whenever they show a scene, I mean, to be fair, I don't particularly always see the need to show anybody on the toilet. Like, I know it happens, but when they show a woman in that kind of situation, it always sticks with me, because like, you just don't see it. But
No,
with
I
guys,
completely
it just
agree.
happens all the time,
Yeah, you can watch
you know,
any
and you just don't even
film.
think about it.
Yeah, you can watch any film or show, and there's always a scene where you get the guy go, you know, he gives it a shake off screen, gives it a flush, and you just don't think anything of it. Whereas if you see a woman pull up her trousers a bit, turn around and flush, it just feels so much more obscene. And that itself, to me, feels obscene. Like, why should
Yeah.
that seem more taboo? Why is everything about
Mhm.
women more taboo? And that's something I like about this film. Girls do a lot of things that boys do, and it's just not even questioned. Oh, another thing I want to add as well is that the main male character, Adrian, he doesn't act particularly masculine or anything. There is no over masculine energy in this film. It is entirely devoted to the feminine and to women.
Yes, which we were talking about a bit before, that we know that the director has come out and said in some interviews that that's not how she wants it to be seen. You know, she's come out and said that it is a feminist film because you just cannot deny the feminist energy of it, but it's a feminist film for everyone, which to an extent I do understand, because I probably would show this film to anyone because I just want to see different reactions depending on situation, gender, sexuality, anything that could affect how you view something.
Yeah.
But I, again, predominantly know that women will relate to this because of the body horror and the body shocks and the transformations
Definitely.
that you go through.
I have this suspicion that if you showed this to a guy, you shouldn't get your hopes up, because they will probably watch it. And I'm not trying to generalize. This is my assumption. You'd show it to a guy, and your typical macho guy, and they would go, "Whoa, that's so weird. Cannibalism, huh? Crazy." And they might not really stop for a second to think about the themes of, female sexuality and stuff. And that's not necessarily their fault. A lot of boys have been raised to disregard any struggle of women's, and I think that is why it's great to have a film like this, because it's stuff that we all know about but we don't talk about or ever see.
But I think on the other side of that as well, I know a lot of women that wouldn't want to watch this or would watch this and just wouldn't be able to get past the cannibalism of it.
See, that's
Because
what's interesting to me, is that she chose such an extreme vehicle for exploring these topics. Like, why did she pick something so extreme? And then she also claims it isn't a horror film, which is interesting to me.
I thought about this whilst I was watching it, because you drew parallels to it like when we were in our brief conversation before, and it got me thinking that if she had chosen any kind of other media, so like for example if she had chosen vampirism, throughout the years vampirism has been so sexualized and so sensualized and given such a, oh, what's the word, people want it basically.
Yeah.
You know, it's been a long time since I watched a film, any kind of vampire film, and it's not been romanticized in some way. Whereas cannibalism, as far as I'm aware, nobody's ever romanticized cannibalism, but it is effectively the same thing. And I couldn't say for sure because I'm not inside this woman's mind, but I would think the one of the reasons for picking it would for that reason, because she didn't want to show these girls who were there just for the voyeuristic pleasure of men.
Yeah.
You know, it's even like the sex scene between Justine and, I forgot his name again.
Adrian.
Adrian. Sorry. Adrian. That scene exists purely for Justine's pleasure. It is so animalistic. It's almost like he's not even there.
And you also have to add that he is gay.
Yeah.
So it is pretty much entirely for her.
Yeah, it's just, like I said, I watched it and I just feel like anybody who watches it and thinks, oh, that's hot, fair enough. But I really don't think that was the point.
No, not at all.
But it was just purely for her own pleasure, which is again another thing that is really explored in Raw. There's the scene with Justine stood in the mirror and her listening to that amazing rap song. And her body movements, the way she's moving, but staring at herself, she's only doing it for herself, you know. She's embracing her own sexuality and her own sexual allure. And she's just kind of like, I think I'm hot. That's it. That's all that matters.
It's great. It's like that rap feels like the starting off point of her truly embracing her darker side of self. Especially when you read the lyrics, like the body language is enough and the visuals, but the lyrics themselves are just, I don't know, they're another level completely. I don't even want to read them because they seem incredibly explicit to say out loud.
However, do go and listen to the song.
Yes, I looked it up. It is Bitchier Than Any Bitches by Ortiz. And it's actually a rap group consisting of twin sisters, which is a really interesting choice.
Mm-hmm. I think it really, that scene in particular, encompasses the transition from feeling a disconnect to your own body and not understanding what's going on to embracing it and being like, all right, this is happening. I'm going to work with it. I'm going to go with it.
Exactly. And I'm pretty sure she's also wearing her older sister's dress in that scene.
She is, yeah. And I think that's the first time she wears it properly, because the first time she's introduced to it, she wears it over her own clothes.
Yeah.
You know, she doesn't even put it on properly.
Yeah, it's awkward.
And I think, just to say, in that scene, even with the way she moves her body to the music and almost kind of becomes one with it, like, I've never heard that song before, so I couldn't say how I would feel about it otherwise, but I know whenever I hear it again, that's all I'm going to think about.
Oh, 100%.
It's just so iconic.
And she's not dancing in like a happy, cheerful, poppy way. She's dancing in very much a like seductive club dance way where you just sway back and forth. And I don't even know how to describe that scene. You kind of just have to watch it, because the combination of the song itself and Grant Marilia's performance is just amazing. Like, it's definitely a standout scene.
I think the way I would go about describing it is that, especially with the particular movements that she's using, she's just kind of doing whatever her body wants to do.
Yeah.
And it goes back into that giving in to it.
Yes, definitely.
And it's, yeah.
No, definitely. I think there are a few scenes where, when she becomes more of her real self and, you know, digs deep, she almost looks like she's in like a fugue state. So there's that rap scene, and then there's also the actual sex scene. She just looks completely out of it. She looks like an actual animal.
Which is incredible. Like, I know that, again, this is definitely one of those films worth watching more than once. Like, the first time, just watch it if you can as a passive audience, just let it all happen, follow the story. But the second time you watch it, really notice how the actress changes her facial features, body posture. She just almost becomes unrecognizable. And it's like the scene in The Party where she's sat in, like you said, that kind of crouch, slouch position, watching over everybody. And she looks like this just intense predator. And it's so different from this scared little, you know, girl who relied on her big sister being at the same school as her.
100%. I think the fact that there are party scenes really says something, because it's almost like in the night, she becomes her real self. She embraces things. Like, the first time she eats flesh, the waxing scene is during the evening, during the nighttime. There's the party scene, obviously. There is the sex scene. There's multiple scenes that are based in night. And obviously it's not as simple as like a yin-yang night and day thing, but I think there's definitely something to say about somebody letting loose in the night. Because as well, it's
I
like...
didn't even notice that.
Yeah.
So stupid.
No, don't. And it's like, also, it's set in a university. So, of course, there's the whole idea of going off by yourself. And, you know, in the day, you're studious, which you see with Justine. And then in the nighttime, you just completely let loose at university. Like, it's unreal what you can end up doing without realizing you're capable of it. I don't mean like anything crazy like cannibalism, but you could have thought you were just a quiet, timid person, go off to uni, meet new people, be handed new opportunities and places and alcohol, and you just go wild. Like, I think it happened to a lot of people when they go to university. And I think it's really interesting to see Justine be kind of awkward in the beginning in that first club scene, you know, the one I mean? And yeah, and then by the time we get to a party scene later in the film, she's looking over the crowd like she owns them.
Mm-hmm. Like, it's almost like she now belongs.
Exactly.
But she's still set apart. I also thought it was really interesting, you just bringing up the first kind of club scene that they're in. The jarringness between scenes of, like, you know, the way it starts of her just out for a kind of last meal with her family, and then they drop her off. A very much stereotypical beginning for a coming of age film.
Yeah.
And then it literally, you don't see her move in, you don't see her find her sister. It just jumps straight into the beginning of the hazing, where somebody just comes into her room, tears her out, still in her pajamas, and puts them into a situation where nobody knows what's going on. And showed a scene that I, again, did not pay attention to the first time I watched it. But the scene where they're crawling through, wherever they're crawling through, I can't remember where, but how it's framed and the way in which everybody in that scene is crawling is almost like cattle going off to the slaughter. so dehumanizing.
There's so much
And then,
animal imagery.
yeah, but again, straight after that, it jumps into that club scene like nothing happened.
Exactly. And I love that. I love that in the daytime you get hints at what
Yeah.
comes in the nighttime scenes. Like, for instance, the hair scene, which is disgusting.
Oh,
Like,
yeah.
yeah. That one is absolutely vile. That's rank. And it just kind of hints at stuff to come in the night, which I think is pretty cool. And I also like the idea of like the duality of it in a way, because her sister's just like this like popular popular person at uni, and you see her dancing at clubs and showing off at parties and stuff like that, and then in the daytime she's considered one of the best students, and they even mention it that the sisters are two of the best students. I think that's a
Yeah.
really interesting point, the dual lives of like teenagers and trying to just figure out which personality of yours you actually are.
Definitely.
I think that where is it? Oh, yeah, so when she leaves her parents, she's timid, she's a bit meek. When she finds meat in her food right at the beginning, she doesn't say anything. It's her mum that goes and says something for her.
Yeah, it's true.
Yeah, she doesn't really have her own voice. And then, towards the end of the film, she's having fights with her sister on rooftops.
Literally in public, yeah. Which again is like, I don't know, every scene in this is pinnacle. I can't.
Yeah.
But that scene, because they start fighting, but their animal sides really start coming out with the way they're biting and fighting with each other, and then the people watching them start to get freaked out. They start to judge them, so they then take solace in each other.
Yeah.
Because they're the only two that understand. And again, I think it just really shows that dysfunctional love that you can have with your siblings, that this person who can be your best friend but also your worst enemy.
Like, she does some truly awful things to her. For example, this how would I explain it, the scene where she kind of goads her during the party.
Yeah. And she like I said, because we see the lead up to that where she invites her into the wardrobe. I'm not gonna lie, it's a veterinary school. Why was there a body in there?
I think the second time I watched it, I just gave up on understanding the geography.
Well, she basically leads her into a morgue, and then it cuts, and then we know something happened, but we can't be sure what. And then it goes to the video of her basically being taunted, almost like, you're holding up a piece of meat to a hungry animal. Who is just giving in to its most basic urges. It doesn't care about how people are seeing it or what people are going to say about it. It just cares about survival.
And when we say she goads her, what we mean is that they're in the morgue. A cadaver has its arm dangling off the side of the table. Her sister keeps pulling the arm up and dropping it down, so Justine jumps up and down trying to catch it in her mouth. It's quite a disturbing scene. And I think it's even more disturbing when you consider that it's filmed, that you don't actually see it. You see footage someone else took of it.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it feels voyeuristic, and it comments on a lot of stuff that happens in teenage culture.
Oh, definitely. Like, it's just, like, of course, there are people out there, like, I'd like to think we're these kind of friends, that if we were in that situation, we'd be like, this is fucked up. We'd take one another out of it.
Yeah.
But when you're in that kind of environment, especially in the early stages, because we don't know exactly how much time passes, I don't think, but it feels like weeks at most. Like, it really doesn't feel like a lot of time goes on. So especially in those early stages of that kind of life where you just want to get by, you just want to make friends, and it's like, everybody's attention's on this girl, at least it's not on me, and it's not a nice way to think, but we've all been there. It's
so much darker, the fact that her sister is the one encouraging the crowd, and that's another element to their twisted dynamic. Like, that's just that's next levels of evil, to be honest. It's one thing to be teaching her how to fucking be a successful cannibal, and it's another one to almost reveal her to everyone she knows. It's like, it almost feels like a jealousy thing in some ways, like she's trying to out her in a way.
Or I don't know, maybe again, definitely in a sadistic, self-pleasing kind of way, but also maybe perhaps trying to show her who she is. Stop, even though we've seen the scene now of her embracing it, her sister hasn't. The last time her sister really saw it was, when she was basically trying to stop her from giving into their quote-unquote natural urges.
Yes.
And she's kind of being like, look, we're no different. You're not better than me.
Yeah, definitely.
And that's what this is. And now everybody can see it. Now we're both kind of pariahs.
Yeah, it feels like she's trying to demean her and bring her to her level. And
Yeah.
it's like she doesn't want her to take her own time and figure things out for herself. She wants her to figure it out on her own personal terms.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And that is, I would say that could be something to do with sisterhood. Sometimes, you know, you do get the older sister that occasionally thinks that they know better when
Well, we
maybe
do.
they don't. Yeah, we'll do, obviously. And yeah, I was talking to Skye before we recorded this about how, much like the sisters in the film, me and my sister went to university only 1 year apart. And in just that 1 year, I thought I had learned everything. Looking back on it now, it's laughable. But at the time,
Mhm.
being honest, I kind of, how would I describe it? I almost looked down on my sister a bit because she didn't want to just let loose and have fun. And in the end, she did start on her own terms. Like, she was patient with it, found friends, and then she went out and partied hard. And out of the two of us, she's the ones that maintained her friendships from university and made genuine friendships, and I'm the one that just had drinking buddies. So sometimes it is about letting other people figure themselves out, and I find it very interesting that in this film, it is the one that figures herself out that actually ends up safe at the end, and it is the sister that tries to pressure her and force her that ends up in prison.
Definitely.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's that kind of, it's like you said, you can help people try and figure out who they are, and I think that's shown, again, whether or not we feel comfortable with it, but that's shown in scenes like when Alexia starts, you know, making fun of her for the body hair that she has, and that what leads into the bikini wax scene. You know, that's her trying to help, and in her mind trying to make her sister feel more, I don't know, comfortable about who she is, even though
Yeah.
her sister from the beginning, she may have been timid, but she seemed pretty okay with who she was and
Yeah, she seems
how
quite
she was.
self-assured. Yeah, I agree.
And I think the biggest thing with the bikini wax scene for me is, we were talking about before, the framing of it,
Oh god,
with
yeah.
the way that Justine is on the bed and you're focused on her raised, parted legs for a long time. And again, you can't say it's been done in a voyeuristic sexual way, because we know what's happening. Again, each to their own. I don't think there's anything particularly sexy about a bikini wax. It's almost more like the position a woman would be in when giving birth. And I think it's very significant that it is this scene that gives birth to the person Justine becomes after this, after she has tasted human flesh for the first time, and everything that follows afterwards is because of this pinnacle scene.
Exactly. I agree. I don't know if it's too deep to read into it as she gives birth to her future self, as in she's the one lying that way, and her
Oh, I
sister.
don't, yeah, no, I don't
Yeah.
mean like that. I mean just the imagery of it makes you
Yeah.
think of birthing and
No, yeah, I definitely get you.
that, yeah.
I think it can be read that she is the one that's bringing it into the world, but also her sister's there in between her legs.
Yeah.
She's almost like a doctor or a midwife or a nurse or something, easing the process, you know, like guiding her along. And that is a weird scene because, like we said, it's incredibly touching when her sister cries. And there's just so much going on. Like, the first half of that scene is, like you said, it's like a birthing position. It's almost uncomfortable that sisters are that close. So that kind of hints as to maybe their boundaries are a bit out of whack. Then we get a dog eating a finger. Then we get her eating a finger. And instead of the finger moment being super shocking, it almost feels triumphant. Like when the music
The music.
hits.
Oh my god. Literally gave me
Yes.
goosebumps. I was just like,
Literally. The music's amazing and it's just used
it
in
really
the
is.
perfect way and at the perfect time. And it's, you know,
Oh
when
yeah.
she's timidly like just taking a lick, and it swallows whole. It's almost like when you have a first sex scene in like a coming of age film, you know, like they might have had kisses and like little things before, but it's always like so hyped up. Like, think like
Yeah.
Lady Bird or something. They always, it's always,
Yeah.
I thought that was quite interesting. But the actual sex scene in this film is crazy. So,
It has a whole other symbolism.
oh Christ. That's it. That, I think that scene, to me, it's funny because it should be the most striking scene because, like we're saying, cannibalism is clearly like a metaphor for coming of age and sex and stuff. But the actual sex scene, to me, is not the most important scene in the film.
It's not. It's almost like the coming together of everything that's already happened. It's like we now know the kind of person she has, whether she wanted it or not, has been transformed into.
Yeah.
But it is a scene of her, as I said, just losing herself, completely giving herself over, which in sex you do, you know, you are kind of giving trust to this other person, and they are in turn giving trust to you. But like I said before, he just was not there.
His face
It
the
was just
entire time.
all
Shits
about her.
himself.
It's kind of like, how do I politely ask her to stop?
He's like, chill.
He's literally like pulling, and again, just the acting is incredible. Just the way he pulls her head back, and her head's just thrashing.
Mm-hmm.
Like she's not. It's like she's possessed. She's not even there.
Exactly, and I think there's something to be said for his understated performance as well, not just hers.
Yeah,
like his
true.
Like all of his acting is in small facial expressions. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
it really. I think he is kind of. He sometimes in the film seems almost like the audience's placement, like the placeholder. Like his reactions are what we should be feeling. Not that it's telling us to feel that way, but you kind of feel like, fuck me, he's a normal person. Which actually makes what happens to him all the more tragic.
Oh, I know. And leading into that, when we were talking about before, you know, why people are more shocked at, say, cannibalism than people just eating meat in general, and it is kind of embodied in the scene just after Alexia and Justine have fought, and they go back to Justine's room, and Justine then goes to sleep in his room, and she takes the key, and she thinks about locking her sister in the room, hesitates for a moment, and then decides not to. And because she doesn't, her sister comes out and does what she does. And it's just interesting to think that if it had been a dangerous animal, a dog or some kind of animal in that room, you wouldn't have thought twice about locking it in there.
And she wouldn't have hesitated.
Exactly. She would have just locked the door, and things probably wouldn't have happened. But I feel like if her sister was going to go on a killing spree, she would have.
There's the scene earlier in the film where the girl's dad says they need to put the dog down after it eats Alexia's finger, and he says that when an animal has tasted flesh, it builds a taste for it. And it's very obvious that during the scene when Justine's looking at the door, that obviously those words are going to be in her head, or at least they're going to be in our own head, hopefully. Otherwise, why would that scene have been included? But essentially, the difference between her thinking about the dog and thinking about her sister is that her sister's human. And it's really interesting that that distinction is there, because why are we so different? We
talked about before how it was also a reflection on Justine herself, that if she kind of gives in and admits that her sister has become this uncontrolled animal, then she has to admit it of herself as well, which she obviously doesn't want to.
100%. And she wants to believe in her, doesn't she? Because at the end of the day, she's her sister.
Of course she does.
Yeah. I wanted to say as well that anytime I've watched this film, I've been very confused as to how she slept through her sister eating somebody sleeping right next to her.
Well, to be fair, when she initially woke up, she thought she had done it, so...
Well, like, what was going on there? Like, did she take some friggin' sleeping tablets? I don't understand.
I don't know, I've slept through fire alarms before.
Yeah, but Skye, a fire alarm is not someone munching into fucking flesh next to you.
Isn't it? Yeah, but I'm just because, and I know it's not the same, but because I have heard people eat before, isn't it implied that her sister stabbed him in the back and killed him before she attacked him? Because it's like Justine was shouting to him when she first woke up. She's saying, "Why didn't you fight me? Why didn't you hit me?" Yeah. And he was the position he was in was very peaceful, which obviously was meant to be a misdirect to make you think he was just sleeping. Yeah. Which also, I just have to question Justine quickly about where her hand was going when she thought he was still alive. But anyway, when she initially thinks she killed him, and it's like, why, if someone's starting like nibbling on your thigh, you would probably wake up. Like, my cats have like bit my cheek before in my sleep. I've woken up.
I don't know though, because even if she like attacked him beforehand, like stabbed him, he would have gone, ugh. And surely Justine would have woken up. It's the only...
Maybe. I don't know, Lyanna. I've never been stabbed.
I know, like, I'm not trying to be like fucking cinema, but it's the only thing in this film where I think there was maybe a little writing error there. Literally the only thing. I don't know.
I think it's one of those things that and I'm sure you as well, will forgive just because it had to be done.
Oh yeah,
for the scene to play out the way it did.
100%. It just upsets me that the film can be so grounded in reality, and then something like that. See, maybe there's an obvious answer. Maybe. I don't know.
I mean, to be fair, I can't lie. I actually as much as I pick into stuff, I actually didn't even think about it until you brought it up just now.
Well, that's the thing, isn't it? I think it's because I've watched the film a few more times than you, maybe.
Yeah.
That, like you said, some of the stuff you really just don't pick up on until the second viewing. So the more you watch film, the more you dig into things. But it's not that big a deal, really. But the bigger deal is they had sex and she was like a deranged animal. Why the fuck did he share a bed with her? It's like, you know what I mean? It's a great scene, but logically it maybe doesn't make perfect sense. But when you're caught up in the film, it doesn't really matter. It's only when you reflect.
I'm not gonna. I maybe he wasn't awake when she got in the bed.
Maybe that's a potential.
You
yeah,
know?
maybe.
And also
maybe.
just because of the kind of character he is, like even during that scene where he was, you know, obviously pretty freaked out by her, I feel like even again. Could just be me reading into it, but I feel like even then he was kind of like, all right, this girl's going through some shit. Like, it's not. Like, she needs a friend. I'm her only friend. Her sister needs a friend. So, you know, he was doing that good guy thing. Because again, the only person character we know of consequence who dies is the nice guy. Someone who, despite his freak out at her in the classroom, which was understandable because he was going through some shit himself, he didn't really understand why he did what he did. He was an okay guy. Like he did kind of look after her, and you know, like when he took her to that truck stop, whatever it was, to go get shawarma because obviously she wanted to try meat. He took her there.
He's
understanding. He went with her.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He seems like the only logical person in the film. Like you said, the truck stop scene, that's an incredibly intimate thing to do for someone. He's not judging her. He takes her somewhere super far away so that she won't be judged by anybody else. He's very patient with her for someone that you know he's only just met, which makes him seem like a genuinely nice person, which makes what happens to him even more horrifying.
Yeah,
it's awful. But you mentioned in our conversation before about the truck stop scene in particular, you found quite interesting.
Oh yeah. Sorry, I was having some orange juice. I was listening. So I think it was interesting to me because, again, this is just a theme I should have done, but I didn't particularly pick up the first time I watched it. But that idea of they compare humans and animals quite a few times.
Yes.
You know, there's the lunch scene with the uncomfortable story about the monkey.
Mm-hmm.
And then at the truck stop, I can't remember if he says it or if he says something and I read into it, but the creepy guy that's there, who is stroking his ear, mentions something about pigs and humans not being that different, which is interesting because aren't pigs pretty vicious? Like if you throw something into a pen, they will just devour it.
I think.
I could be wrong. The only reason I bring it up is because obviously there are a lot of animals out there that you know that will happen to. Like if you throw a piece of meat into a lion's den or a hyena's den or whatever, you know they are gonna go mad over it.
Mm-hmm.
I just feel like, I don't know, maybe I'm completely wrong, but I just feel like that's a fun fact I know about pigs. And I just think it's an interesting comparison because obviously pigs, when referred to humans, is usually the connotation of being gluttonous or being unclean or just being a lower form of life. And this guy who, from his actions, I would argue is a lower form of life, just compares humans to pigs just outright.
He makes this comparison whilst he himself is very openly being creepy. He seems like someone early in the film who's embraced weirdness. You know, he seems almost out of place due to how semi-normal the film's been so far. I think he's an early introduction to where the film could head.
It just shows how desensitized we are when I know what you mean, but you say semi-normal. She has eaten a rabbit's kidney at this point.
Yeah, we haven't even mentioned that yet.
The rabbit's kidney?
Yeah.
Was that the first thing we mentioned?
The rabbit's kidney?
Yeah.
No, it wasn't.
Yeah, it was. We talked about it because it's part of the hazing. Go through your little notes.
Oh, I haven't been reading my notes in order at all. I'll cut this bit out.
I was going to say, to be fair, we haven't got a lot of this in order, but
that's the thing. You can't do it in order, can you? When conversation's going. But I
think we're doing well.
Yeah, I wanted to say another thing you said before we started recording about the truck stop scene is how. Not he. You said that.
Oh, what Justine says.
Yeah, you said what Justine says.
Oh, because when they go and eat the shawarma.
Yes.
And she says to him that she can't eat it if he's watching.
Yes, that feels very intimate.
Yeah. And I also think it touches upon something we haven't really mentioned yet, but that's the ideas of body issues and eating disorders that are like kind of sprinkled throughout the film, like the toilet and hair scene that we briefly mentioned before. When you first watch it, apart from being something shocking and something quite difficult to watch because it goes on for quite a while, it doesn't particularly seem like there's any meaning behind it. But I thought when I was watching it, because when Justine comes out of the bathroom, there's a girl there that says something along the lines of, if you use 2 fingers it's easier, and she's obviously giving her advice on how to make herself throw up, which you kind of just have to assume is this girl endorsing bulimia.
Yeah.
And something so commonplace that she just says it with a smile on her face. And I think that kind of her pulling the hair out of her throat kind of side of it represents that, because it's something that you don't really feel like you have any control over, and you feel like it's something you have to do, and she has to get this hair out because it's choking her.
Obviously, statistics show that eating disorders are really common among teenage girls, and or just teenagers in general. And I think it's a mental illness, but it's also a form of compulsion, and it just goes along with sex. It's her there's so many moments in this film where she tries to take control of different forms of compulsions, or she just gives into them entirely. And the fact that this other girl is actually trying to encourage it in a way just says so much about, I think, teenage culture.
Definitely. I don't think at any point anyone other than her roommate helps her.
No, nobody.
And her sister. But again, that's twisted.
Yeah,
different aspects.
Whenever she turns to adults, they're somewhat useless, I would say.
Yeah, which is another thing we were talking about before, when there's, apart from Justine's parents, there are maybe like 2 other adults in this. Oh, and again, the creepy guy at the truck stop. But there's a scene just after they've thrown, like, fake or real, I'm not actually sure at this point, but the blood on all of the new students, and then they all go to class in these bloody clothes, and the teachers don't say anything. Like, obviously they're just used to it, and it's just kind of that
creepy
idea of this. It's creepy, but it's the helplessness and vulnerability and how alone you feel. Like, you feel like no one's gonna help you if you have an issue, which it's unfortunate, and I'm not tearing down any of the good lecturers out there that will help you, but it's something we, both felt, and know people who have felt like that at university, that the sole people that are there to help you just really, they don't know, and they don't understand, and you just feel like you can't talk to them because of it. And I just feel like that really kind of lent into that, because they didn't question something they could physically see, or didn't ask, you're not a bit cold, because you've had all this thrown on you, like, you were all right, how's your first week, anything like that,
Yeah, it's very alienating. I also think that I'll just leave a little warning here, little trigger warning, because I just want to mention the parallels with rape culture in university. It's almost like they're being forced into things they don't want to do and they feel uncomfortable with, for a sense of togetherness, like to join a club. And as we all know, that, people can be forced to do some uncomfortable things for the sake of joining clubs and to be accepted. And the teachers are aware of these traditions, which could be uncomfortable, and they don't say anything. And that is definitely very similar to stuff that happens in real life. And that's
just hazing in a nutshell.
Exactly. And they kind of victim blame at points, like you mentioned earlier.
Oh yeah, when Justine goes to the doctor after she first started developing her rash, and the doctor, the conversation they have goes something along the lines of the doctor asking her, did you want to eat the rabbit's kidney? And she says no. And then she says, well, did you say no? And she says yes. Says, well, did they force you? And she says, well, no, which isn't true. Like, nobody held her down and made her eat it, but she was coerced and bullied by her own sister into doing something that she obviously didn't want to do, so much so that she threw up after she did it.
You could, in some ways, you could read the cannibalism that she develops as almost like a parallel with hypersexuality that some people develop after sexual trauma. So that's to say that not everybody's relationship with sex starts off great. It's like when she first starts eating human flesh, she feels awkward about it, she feels timid about it, and it's not necessarily that great an experience. But I'm trailing off there, but I can definitely see some odd
No,
parallel.
I understand what you mean. I mean, I saw the same things myself, and I did debate whether or not to bring it up
Mm-hmm.
because obviously I know it is a very sensitive topic. But to be fair, that is what this film covers. You know, whether you see it or not from the themes, even eating disorders
Yeah.
are a very sensitive and triggering thing to people.
Well, this film in itself
Body,
covers taboo topics.
yeah, you know, like socially taboo and also illegal.
Yeah.
And I think it's just when you first told me about the film, this is not what I expected it to be, and
Yeah.
in a good way, because you know I expected it to be a film about cannibalism, which, as advertised, it is to an extent, and it's such a shame that when you summarize stuff, that is how it comes across, and it's like some of the people who have asked me, you know, as a lead up to this episode, the first episode we're doing of White Noise, what film are we doing? And when I told them about it, they've kind of given me this look like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
And I understand because, summarized, it is a very basic horror film. Well, that's what it sounds like. And it's just really not.
But don't you think sometimes that makes great fiction? Like, I mean, say you describe Hereditary to someone,
Mm-hmm.
like, oh, it's about a family with trauma that becomes paranormal. Or you describe The Lodge, a woman with a dark past in religion starts to become rehaunted by memories. And it sometimes a simple premise is best because you can inject it with a million themes. And I think that's exactly what happened
True.
with this film.
But I think that's why, like we kind of said right at the beginning of this, we wanted to create this kind of podcast that did take these films that kind of get glanced over because on their surface they seem so simple and they just get pushed into a corner.
Of course, yeah.
But I do think, and as episodes of this progress, we'll start looking at others. But this kind of horror is the new age horror that people are looking into now. Not the monsters that chase you in the night, not the supernatural spirits you can't see, but the everyday things
Yes.
that we all go through. You
Or
know, the fact that I just stopped you.
Oh, I was just gonna say quickly that like
Yeah.
or the semi horror. So like, you know, like The Invisible Man
Yeah.
that recently came out.
Yeah.
It's not super extreme, but the real horror is in the human aspects, like
Yeah.
you
The
know,
gaslighting
emotional
of it.
abuse and gaslighting. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that's what people want to see now. They want to see human horror. That's and I think that's a product of our times. Like they always say that horror reflects your times. So you get Godzilla in reaction to nuclear weaponry. You get The Exorcist.
Series like Black Mirror.
Exactly. Like
Things
that's
like
what
that
people
just
want to
reflect
see.
society.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I think that teenage culture has become so crazy and that being a teenage girl just seems more complicated than ever. This film will attract people. I think it's a slow
Definitely.
burn and it's definitely building a cult following. I would like to see it become a full-fledged cult classic.
I think it will.
Hopefully.
I really do think it will. And I hope we contribute some way to that.
Yeah.
But one of the biggest things about this film is most of the time one of the biggest letdown about any film, but especially horrors, is the ending.
Oh, yes.
My God. Again, if you have listened this far and you haven't seen the film, I'm not asking you anymore. I am telling you, please come and watch it.
Yeah.
Because I don't even know. It was just horror. The end of horror films tend to always be the other. They end up being cliffhangers, or they end up being a nice, tidy summary of
Or a
what's going to happen,
reveal or something.
or something like that. But they're always the same. You can always predict them.
Yeah.
And watching it again the second time, knowing what's happening, I can see what's going to happen. I can see why and how it was leading up to that. But the first time I watched it, I've just genuinely never seen a better ending for something in a long time.
Skye's jaw was on the floor.
I was just, it was incredible.
So
And I thought it was so interesting watching it again because it was something as simple as like her dad having that scar on his lip the few times that we saw him. And you don't even think about it because people have scars. They do. There's not always a story behind them. And then when he turns around at the end and he's like, it wasn't until we had our first kiss, and I was just like, and when he undoes his shirt and he's got all the scars, and then that last line, it's just, it's great.
Speechless. I remember when I first watched it, I was just sat there staring at the screen, amazed. I just
It was insane.
it's a masterclass in how to end a film. Like, sometimes you can feel like you've written yourself into a corner, and I do think that could have happened with Raw if they hadn't add this little extended ending. Because
I mean, they could have ended it with Alexia in the prison. Like
exactly,
it was a pretty mundane and expected ending, but they
because
could have ended it there, and it would have been a tidy end to a
it
film.
would have been a tidy ending, but it just wouldn't have had that oomph. I think
Yeah.
they had to zhuzh it up a bit by adding that extra ending, and I think it just really leaves a stamp on the whole thing. You know, like I don't know how to explain. I find that sometimes horror really has a tendency to write itself into a corner because they've
Yeah.
talked about so many things, had so many plot threads, so many just so many things going on at once that they don't know how to end it, and they never land on their feet. Say, for instance,
Hmm.
Hereditary, a lot of people hate that ending, but it was the only way it could end because of the way that events had been leading up. With
Yeah.
Raw, they did do that inevitable ending because of course that was going to happen, but the fact that they took 2 minutes to kind of put a footnote just, I think,
Hmm.
takes the film from a 9 to a 10 for me.
Yeah, it's true. It was just that kind of like everything that the film had kind of given you, so its themes and its shock, and then just the storyline and the relationships all kind of came to that pinnacle point at the end where it was just like, damn.
It's just
This
amazing.
film knew what it was doing. It didn't feel like the ending didn't feel like an afterthought. Every
No.
part of this film could
Oh,
tell it was done for a reason. It wasn't just an ending because things have to end. It was an ending for a purpose.
it's an ending to add more impact. I
Yeah.
it reminded me of, in classic horror films, say like Friday the 13th and Nightmare on Elm Street, where you're like, whoa, that's a good
Yeah.
film. And you get that final bit at the end where you think, holy fuck. So Jason jumping out of the lake, or
Yeah.
Freddy jumping out and grabbing the mum in A Nightmare on Elm Street.
It's
Those
true.
scenes become classic in their own right.
I
And I
just
think,
hope that this doesn't spawn a 7-film franchise.
oh, fuck off, no.
It just loses more and more with every
Well,
film.
maybe Julia Ducournau's next film will be some other taboo. Who knows?
I would imagine so. I can't imagine from reading about some of her previous works, and it is true that this lady likes her body horrors.
Yes.
Um, I can't imagine seeing her name attached to kind of anything. I don't want to say mainstream as in like, oh,
No, I could agree with that though. I
you
could.
know what I mean? Like there's nothing wrong with mainstream. Mainstream is fun. It's just I just can't imagine her name being put on something that's then going to get lost in a crowd of a million duplicates.
Oh no, I agree. Like, it's like when Robert Eggers does The Witch and then he does The Lighthouse, two of the most
Hmm.
bizarre films and two of the most critically acclaimed horror films of recent years. And then it is announced that he's doing what's it called? The Norseman. His upcoming
Mm.
film is, I think, going to be a big studio film. He's got a huge budget for it. It's probably going to be amazing because it's Robert Eggers, but something about it just doesn't sit right with me. Like, of course I
Mm.
want people to have success, that's incredible, but sometimes you just don't get the same vibe, and that
It
does
is
not.
difficult. Well,
Mm,
it's like with musicians.
yeah,
When you first find a band or an artist and they're kind of low key, and you really fall in love with their kind of sound, and then they find mainstream success and they grow and they become more of maybe what they actually wanted to do, or they become more of what will sell.
it's interesting, isn't it?
Um,
Because you never know
it is
which,
interesting.
of those things it is.
Exactly, and there are some out there in the music industry and in the film industry that really stick to their roots.
Yeah.
But again, sometimes you can have the opposite effect of that. Things can become really stale really fast. Like, there is only so much exploration you can do of certain topics before you start repeating yourself. Like, I couldn't think of another film quite like Raw. Like, I know you mentioned Ginger Snaps before, had similar
Hmm.
themes and kind of idea, but I've never seen a film like Raw before. And I don't think I ever will again.
The question is if you'd ever really want to.
It's true. I don't it would just depend, because sometimes you get people who are obviously inspired by things that they see and artists that they like, and they create their own versions, and sometimes it's terrible, but you got to give them merit for trying.
Yeah.
And then other times they've taken something from it that you didn't even really pay attention to, like you thought you did, and they expand that. So it would just depend.
Yeah, there's ways that you can go about it and almost amplify it. Like, so obviously in Hereditary, I know I keep bringing it up, it's because it's incredible. There's the house is almost made like a doll house, you get me? And
Yeah.
that was one of the main things that people commented on. It's so striking, it's amazing. You go back, look at Ari Aster's influences, and he basically ripped that straight off of another director from the film The Cook, the Thief, His Wife and Her Lover, and he has stated
Hmm.
that it's one of his biggest influences. And it's just really interesting to think that he has become more renowned for something that he took from someone else than the original person was. Like, no, it sounds terrible, can't remember the director's name. I think i think that it would be really interesting to see how Raw influences future films.
I think we're almost kind of already seeing it to an extent, because obviously this film came out, what, 4 years ago now, and
Yes, I think
it's
so, yeah.
still not got the following that it really should have. Again, it's not a film for everybody. I'm not saying that everybody should love this film, because you're not going to.
Hmm.
Some people are just genuinely can't stand this kind of body horror stuff, which is fair enough. It is honestly one of my personal fears. Like, I really do have issues with stuff like this.
Yeah.
Not cannibalism, I just need to put that on the record. But for that reason, I enjoy watching it, because it's something that actually does affect me. I'm not just watching it and being like, oh, all right, it's another killer in a mask, it's another ghost picking up a chair. Like, it's something that actually it just affects me in a way that I pay attention.
Yeah. Oh, I agree.
And I think that kind of thing is slowly starting to make its way into horror. Not exactly the same, because not everything's becoming body horror, but it's like you said before, horror films seem to be becoming more now a comment on society or on the way people grew up, things that, you know, we've all gone through in some way.
I think horror is starting to return to its roots. People are talking about a new age
Yeah.
and, like the horror renaissance. But I don't think it's really that at all. I think horror is just getting back to what made it special in the beginning. So you talk about, like we were talking about earlier, Godzilla and The Exorcist and The Wicker Man and things like that. These successful classic movies always have something more to say. They're never just about, the surface level horror. The ones that have done
Yeah.
really well recently do the exact same thing. So Ari Aster's films, The Witch commented on women's place in society. It's interesting to see that these films are doing so well critically, but not as well financially anymore. Because you think
Mm-hmm.
about something like The Exorcist, and that did well commercially. People wanted to turn up. So what does it say that when we start doing this more, I hate the term elevated horror, I think it's really condescending, but when
Mm-hmm.
we start doing maybe more like thematically rich horror and people, the general audience, don't actually want to see it, I think that's actually kind of sad. Like, there's nothing you can
It
do
is.
about it, but I don't know, I feel like people are missing out on a lot.
I agree. I think, again, though, it's one of those things that it's just things like this. I said that they're not going to be everybody's cup of tea.
Yeah.
Some people do still, and again, there's nothing wrong with it, but some people do still like the horror of days past.
Yes, definitely.
It's just, I think people need to be more open to the movement of things, because things don't stay the same way forever. In like 10 years' time, this will change again. Different
Hmm.
things become horrific. Like, you just look at the state of the world at the moment. It's like every month, some kind of new real world horror is coming to the surface.
Yeah.
Things that have always been there, or new things, but either way, they're not being ignored anymore.
And I think that's really
Um,
great.
I think it's brilliant, and I think almost in a way, this is why we kind of need this genre and the way it's propelling these kind of issues forward. Because despite the fact that Raw is a film about essentially cannibalism, it's got the two of us talking about sexual awakenings and body issues and eating disorders and things that affect people every day.
Jordan Peele, who I would say is the king of this kind of
Yes,
niche area of horror, I think he
the
coined the
pioneer.
term, exactly. I think he coined the term political horror or social horror,
Yeah.
something like that. And I think it didn't start with Get Out. I wouldn't say that, but I would say that definitely created an audience interest. And then with films like The Invisible Man, which did incredibly well,
Yeah.
hopefully we will see more of these films because more people will watch them.
Hmm.
I really do hope so, because you could ask someone to go see one of these films with you, like say The Lighthouse. I went with some co-workers. they were horrified. They were so horrified by it that they didn't really know what to think of it, which is fair because same. But I think the ones like The Invisible Man, which really toe a middle ground between being just fun and enjoyable and having a deeper meaning, are the way forward for this genre.
Definitely. This shift in horror is happening, but for the time being, there are more films out there like this that are already the beginning of this movement. And hopefully in the time to come, we will start looking at them on White Noise, hopefully doing the little we can to push them more up into the light, and just to get more people to realise that there's more out there than these stereotypes, because a lot of people seem to think horror ended in like the 80s.
Yes, 100%.
And it really didn't. It's continued, but it's just changed.
Exactly. I did a video on my YouTube channel about 2 years ago maybe, called Is Horror Dead? And essentially I went on Reddit, did some recon, and I asked people if they thought horror was dead. I got attacked so badly. I had stated that I personally didn't believe it was, but that plenty of other people think it ended in like 1989 pretty much. And lots of people asked me where I'd seen this assumption, but Skye, I'm sure you can agree with me, this seems to be like a common consensus.
It's true. People, the thing is, there are, I suppose you would say, purists out there, and I don't mean that in the sense of like, well, no, I kind of do. I mean, there are people out there that like the one, you know, they are so kind of stuck in the one thing that they like and believe that a genre is, that they refuse to explore anything outside of it. And you are entitled to like what you like. You are entitled to have a preference.
Yes.
But if you do enjoy horror and you see yourself as a horror fanatic, for want of a better word, you have to see these kind of films, even if you don't like them, just to see how horror is shifting, because maybe it will shift into something more you do prefer, but you won't know if you're just ignoring them, because there are so many people who, like I said, will hear the summary of this and not want to watch it because they think it's just one thing.
But then I think that's the case of a lot of the films that we're probably going to do on this channel.
Yeah,
I really do. And I find that a lot of the films that we've talking about are very much considered too taboo to really delve into, if that makes any sense. Like, people have seen them, but people don't necessarily make videos or podcast episodes about.
Yeah, that's true. Not that, like, we're not like these revolutionary pioneers.
No, not at all. No.
We are still two of your typical girls from the Southwest, but that just enjoy the movement of horror and the movement of the film industry in general, and can't wait to jump out and join it.
Exactly.
And this is our first step into doing that. So I hope, to anyone who is still around, thank you.
Thank you for getting this far.
Yeah, thank you for getting this far. Thank you for clicking on it in, the first place. It's just nice to have somewhere where you can just talk about something you enjoy, something you love analysing, and hopefully bring in more people who enjoy and want to do the same thing.
And we're hoping that people listening to this enjoy it as much as we enjoy talking about the topics.
Definitely, because it's difficult for us to judge, because like I said, the patient zero of this podcast is, I'm always going to refer to it now, it shall not be named, even though there are some people out there who know the truth of it. The first time we recorded it, we loved it because it was just us talking about something that we enjoyed. Once we have this one all done and finished, we might think the same thing. We don't know, but we know this is what we want to do, and I think we'll keep trying until we get it.
Exactly. I thoroughly enjoy doing this, and I really hope other people enjoy listening, and I hope you enjoy doing this too. So thank you all for listening if you've gotten this far, and we hope you look forward to the next episode. That's it for today. Bye.